Playing Vampires by Nicholas Leonard. Zachary Blue was stalking Layla Ottenheimer down Anway Street. It was a few minutes after 10, and there was that bristle of wind settling into sleep within the branches of the suburban neighbourhood. She, Layla, that 5'3" escaped animatronic of a girl, was the only thing out there on the streets beside Zachary that night. Most of the houses had turned out their lights and locked their doors, even though there hasn't been a break-in of any sort in the neighbourhood's privileged history. Short brown hair, skin that seemed to need ultraviolet light in order to glow like snow. She knew she was being stalked. Zachary Blue was a very bad stalker. He was nervous at it, keeping his hands in the pocket of his black North Face coat. It was an April night and was chilly. He was somewhat affected by it, but Layla was too fraught with the thrill of the night to be chilled. She needed the goosebumps. This was all her idea. They had met in a theatre club at the beginning of the semester. Seniors, Layla joined because she was full of secret life that had nowhere else to go. Zachary had joined because he needed to get out of his shell. His tall and bulking demeanour betrayed him. He was a gentle giant of sorts, but hunched over a bit so that even his true height betrayed him too. Even though it was just pretend, he still felt wrong about it. God, it was her idea. "You be the vampire," she had texted him. "Follow me into the cemetery and seduce me there." He liked her, so he obeyed, and obeying her felt wrong in a thrilling way. Pretending to be a stalker felt wrong in a way not as thrilling. But Layla looked over her shoulder to see the skulking figure behind her, and she was thrilled. She quickened her pace, forcing her pursuer to quicken his. She put a skip into her walk. Her hair bounced a little. It looked different than it had hours and hours ago earlier at the school. She must have done it in 3 hours between. It was wavy and willing to bounce. It bounced on the collar of her black leather jacket that she wore over a red fleece. She had invited him to play this game because he was shy enough to agree to it. Too shy to say no, maybe. He had said yes out of some surprise that made his face go red. That really pleased her. But no vampire's face would ever really blush like that. It certainly wasn't blushing anymore as he followed her. He had popped his collar and spiked his hair to appear to be more rebellious. She hadn't shown him she had noticed yet. All she had did was veer onto the sidewalk to the right where she kept to the middle of the street, keeping a distance. He moved just as stiffly as Count Orlok. They furthered the chase. She started feeding her mind with the thoughts she reckoned an actual stalking victim would have. "I wish I'd brought my dog out with me," she thought to herself, channeling her inner Wattpad narrator. Zachary looked over his shoulders. Layla looked over his. "Stop following me," she shouted. When the cemetery fence came into view, Zachary stopped, the skidding of his shoes making a scratchy echo into the night. He watched her further on beside the cemetery fence in a hurry. The tapping of her shoes made her own Bambi-esque echo into the night. He reluctantly continued to follow her, beginning to worry whether or not her shout had alerted anyone. It was reckless. Be sure thought that, but he continued playing his part and followed the girl into the cemetery. He stopped before the opened cemetery gates and watched her. She stayed on the black pavement path that cut between the chess match of tombstones. The occasional Madonna statue welcomed her, only to have her walk right past their opened arms. She walked into the gospel of the willow trees, whose lazy leaves whispered in the wind. He continued on, entering the cemetery, careful not to lose his prey, but also being careful not to be too close to her, like something stalking a deer. It was his first hunt. It might have been because Layla had read too many obscure YA novels, too many Colleen Hoover books, too many Wattpad abominations. That was the kindling to this wild game. Yes, it was exactly that, but Zachary didn't know this, and he was just following an eccentric girl from school. He looked over her shoulder one more time and saw him in the path as still as one of the cemetery statues. His silhouette in the night, and the gossip of the willow trees, was accelerating, and she hurried her pace, sneaking and snaking off the path. He had to compensate for this, and hurried his own pace. The worry of being seen was alleviated from Zachary. They were just amongst the dead now, and he could surprise her by walking faster than he walked when they were out in the open of Annway Street. She noticed this, hid her excitement and pretended to be alarmed as she tried to escape his sight by slipping behind the mausoleum. He saw her, followed her, and eventually cornered her, when she saw a crack in the door of the mausoleum and slipped into it, much to his dismay. "Why are you following me?" she exasperated when he entered the mausoleum that was no bigger than a guest bedroom. He was close enough to see the artificial terror in her eyes. She did a good job at furrowing her brow in a worried manner, and it made him feel like a bad man even more. Sticking to character, he stepped forward in response. She stepped back. He stepped forward. She stepped back again, her rear making a soft contact with the cold stone wall of the mausoleum. The stained glass windows were almost turquoise, but had mosaics of angels at the base, angels with desert colours of brown and cactus flower and with plumes of yellow sunlight at the angel's base, but the yellow was the light their impact on the earth had made. The stained glass windows were adjacent and identical, and gave the single stone coffin a less daunting presence. It was just a prop to them. "Who are you?" Layla stuttered. She pressed her hands against the wall, its popcorn texture poking her palm. "Get away from me, please!" Zachary dipped his head, examining her, feeding on the sight of her terror as might a vampire would. He rolled up his lip, baring his teeth as they both imagined to be fangs. Layla shocked herself with a jolt of fright. Mere inner pyrotechnics just for show. Please, what are you going to do? Have you? Zachary answered in monotone voice. Layla liked it. She fought back a smirk. He took the chance and leaned down and opened his mouth, not knowing the limits to their game. He felt remorseful when his teeth accidentally made contact with her neck, but it made her shiver until she got back into character and pushed him away. What are you doing? Her voice stayed inside the mausoleum. Zachary stepped forward again, going to pretend to bite her neck, but her hands pressed against his chest. It was a way of keeping his mouth away as she recalled what he was, what he sought to do. Oh my God, she squealed, trying to push him away. What are you? A vampire. And I've been watching you for a long time. Layla gasped, her mouth remaining in the shocked shape, her expression deflated. Why me? She asked. I can hear your heart. I've heard it. No other heart transports the elixir that yours does. And no other heart transports so healthily as yours. He admitted and admitted once more breathlessly. I can hear it. Her expression tried to become shocked again, but she was taken aback with the hands still firm against his chest. My heart? She asked, saying like a broken prayer. And it was then that she gave him a look that ruined it all. Her eyes became doe eyes, helpless at him. It made him forget that they were just playing pretend. Yes. He broke out in a pitiful, normal voice, the one he'd used to say, present in theatre club. Your heart. I can hear it now, he said, this captured by her doe eyes. He wanted to bend down to put his mouth against her neck again, but this time he wanted to keep it there. He immediately missed that rush that he got when his teeth had accidentally touched the smooth surface of her neck. She saw this desperation in his eyes that were supposed to belong to a monster, and she pushed her hands more firmly on his chest as some reminder. She shook her head, intensifying the doe eyes, but it was such a pity that she let them fall away from him. Please, she begged, just let me go. I swear, I want anyone but you. But I want you, Zachary urged. It was almost a whimper. He adjusted his standing, his eyes like a lighthouse on a stormy night. Lighthouse eyes he needed for her doe eyes to come back to him. They beamed so desperately on her, searching the sea of her expression for her eyes, for her doe eyes to come back to him. Just let me, he further urged. Finally, Layla gave the man her eyes again. She was a master actress, and Zachary fell victim to her right then and there in the mausoleum, as the stained glass windows filtered in the moonlight and turned it grey and blue. What will happen? She asked breathlessly. If you bite me, I'll have your heart forever. He made it up on a whim. You'll belong to me, and we'll live and sleep in this mausoleum forever. He wished aloud. He was so suddenly too desperate to be a vampire. He was a boy from school then. It gave Layla worried to her face, but she maintained her character. She looked at the vampire as if something strange and wrong was happening to him, as if sunlight was already breaking through the stained glass windows, but it wasn't sunlight. It was her. And she wasn't just a character to him anymore, all because of the doe eyes she flashed at him. May I bite you? May you what? She croaked, breaking character. But he didn't notice. He bent down, and what was meant to be a bite became a sucking kiss upon her neck. She let it happen for a few seconds, feeling her skin be vacuumed into the ring of his lips. Am I bitten? She asked. And she asked it while lancing her doe eyes at him when he pulled away. It was such an unfair game of jousting her eyes played. Yes, he said sharply. She got on her tippy toes and kissed him. His eyelids dropped the instant her lips perched themselves into his, and it ended just as quick as it had begun. Okay, done, she chirped. But Zachary wasn't done. He was amazed. It couldn't end. They were there. Vampire and woman. She had just kissed him. It couldn't end there. Her eyes couldn't recede into her normal eyes like that. Her normal eyes, they looked so beautiful now that he knew what they could transform into. Done. Done, she said matter of fact, and started moving past him toward the ajar door of the mausoleum. Will we do this again? She left, leaving him astonished beside the lone stone coffin. She took to him into the theatre club the next week, the next time they had, but she wouldn't answer his texts. He was Zachary Blue, the classmate, no longer the vampire stalker. She was still Layla to him. She was Layla on the street, in the cemetery, in the mausoleum, in the theatre club, as she laughed amongst her friends from across the auditorium of the school. He watched her, hoping she'd return his lighthouse gaze, hoping he'd hook up those eyes. But he never did. He was too shy to approach her in person about it. He tried, of course, but it divulged into peppy small talk. She made it peppy. He tried at least 5 times to see if she wanted to walk out of her house some night to repeat the game. But she did not respond. The last text he sent to her was a desperate question mark. So, Zachary started going out on his own after 10. His hair wasn't spiked like it was before, and he walked with his hands in his coat pocket, not from a chill, but from shame. There was no girl fishing him forward, baiting him into the cemetery. The cemetery seemed a lot more ominous when he passed it at night on his way to the pond. The neighbourhood was settled around. He stood stoically on the shore of the pond and watched the traffic cross on the other shore, headlights crawling smoothly past. He watched the lights reflect on the black surface of the pond and thought of her doe eyes, how they had corrupted him. He kicked the dirt and then gave that up, looking back on the one night game. It felt like a missed opportunity, a dream to stumble over, a dream to be so upset at for having ended, for waking up from him. His hands never left his pockets as he stood there on shore. Some nights he stood there until 11:30, bewitched and comforted and tortured all at once by the thing that was then never was. It made him realize that vampire he could play. That vampire he could play the sad and sullen one, the one tortured about the love he missed when the eternal life came calling. His crypt, the pond, her doe eyes never mercying him away again. And maybe he did hear her heart after all on those nights afterwards. Yes, he thought he did hear it in between the distant brooms of traffic. But all he heard was really just his one heart that was still, even still, underneath the spell of a girl who knew not what she was doing with those doe eyes. But in a theatre club, Zachary would catch a glimpse of Layla's neck in between the swivels her head made in conversation with her friends. Her wavy hair would wave out of the way and reveal the spot his mouth had landed upon that night. In those espionage moments, he knew he had bitten her after all, and he would have sworn he would have a swollen mark there on the birthplace of his desire. He didn't know what he was seeing was the fading hickey left there by another boy, but to him, the vampire he almost was, he convinced himself he had bitten Layla Artenheimer, and he was assuaged. He was comforted while standing on the edge of the pond, watching the distant traffic, as he always did, thinking about the faintest mark on her neck, and he was reminded of that lucky moment in the mausoleum. He meditated on it. He made his nights up by dwelling on that one 5-minute occurrence inside the mausoleum, inside their mausoleum. He brooded merrily like a vampire, stalking the night, thinking of his one and only prey, the only creature he had ever bitten. Layla had made Zachary blue, a vampire after all. Toward the end of the school year, he couldn't take it anymore, and in the lackadaisical midst of phys ed, he hunted her down. Glass was inside the gym that day, and the coach told the kids to stay active somehow, whether they be playing basketball or walking the track. Layla had chosen to walk the track with 2 other girls. They were in the thralls of gossip and folding their arms and looking down at the track when Zachary ran up to her as madly as an escaping puppet. "Layla," he gasped, Pan putting his hand on her shoulder. She shot back, cocking her lips in an unsure expression. Her eyes went wide with a mix of dread and sheer surprise. The trio of girls were arrested in the scene. He seemed to be about to put his weight against her, or to cry on her shoulder, for his face was scrunched with desperation. "I know you remember my bite," he said, heaving out the words. Layla was frozen in embarrassment as the girls beside her watched in entertained confusion. "Please tell me you feel it too." He shook his head, his eyes wet with pleading. "Huh?" Layla blurted. Ploughing through her confusion, Zachary leaned down and forward and perched his lips onto her neck. Layla squealed, jumping on her tippy toes as he bit her. He actually bit her. A wet and red mark was imprinted in her neck when he pulled away. The bite did not mop up the desperation in his eyes, the desire that left him so confused for so long. She slapped her palm onto her neck. It was a warm, revolting feeling to feel his saliva stamp between her neck and the ball of her wrist. She looked at him wearingly. The other girls stepped back. One asked if they wanted Layla to go to the coach for her. But there was a pause. Layla was too shocked to say anything. And Zachary was staked. Zachary was impaled with anxiety as he waited for her to say something. Zachary was suspended for 5 days and graduated that year with the nickname "that boy who bit that girl in the gym class." Layla did not turn into a vampire, and she definitely did not start liking Zachary back. In the wake of all that undead desperation was only embarrassment. Despite the nasty looks, the jokes, and disappointment of his parents, there remained a strange fulfillment in Zachary Blue. In the wake of that twister rejection which tore through him in that day in the gym class when Layla gawked at him with a hand on her neck, there was a feeling of satisfaction. It was worth all the goofy, playground-esque disaster. It was worth the meetings with the dean and the principal and the coach. It was probably why his face didn't go red during the meetings like it should have done. And the game of vampires was complete. No other rejection could compare. It was just a dreamy fluke in the early years of life.